The courtroom smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. Graham Foster sat in the witness chair, his hands folded carefully on the wooden rail before him, watching Derek Simmons' lawyer pace like a predator circling wounded prey. "Mr. Foster," the lawyer said, stopping directly in front of him, "you're worth approximately $11 billion. Is that correct?" "Give or take," Graham replied evenly. "Give or take." The lawyer smiled without warmth. "And you expect this court to believe that a man of your considerable resources has no ulterior motive in pursuing a relationship with a single mother of three? That you simply stumbled into this family out of the goodness of your heart?" Graham glanced at Simone, seated behind her lawyer at the plaintiff's table. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, 3 seats sat empty. The girls weren't allowed in the courtroom during testimony. They were down the hall with Simone's mother, probably terrified, probably wondering if they caused all this by approaching a stranger at charity gala 6 weeks ago. "Mr. Foster?" The lawyer leaned closer. "I asked you a question." Graham turned back to face him. "You asked me about my motives. You want to know why a billionaire would choose to spend his time with 3 children who aren't his? Why he would show up at science fairs and piano recitals when he could be anywhere else in the world? Enlighten us." The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison watched from her elevated bench, pen poised over her notepad. Derek sat at the defense table looking smug, certain this line of questioning would expose Graham as some kind of predator or manipulator. Graham took a breath. "For years ago," he said, "I buried my wife and my 3-year-old son. Their names were Katherine and Oliver. They died because a man decided his need to drive home after drinking was more important than their lives." The smugness drained from Derek's face. "I spent the next 4 years building companies, donating to hospitals, attending galas where I knew no one and no one knew me. Not really. I drank tea instead of alcohol because I'd seen what alcohol could do, and I sat alone because being alone felt safer than risking loss again." Graham's voice remained steady, but something raw had entered it. 6 weeks ago, 3 little girls walked up to my table at a charity event and asked me to pretend to be their father. Do you want to know why, counselor? Because their actual father had broken so many promises that they'd given up waiting for him to care. They were 8 years old, and they'd already learned that begging didn't work. So they tried strategy instead. He looked directly at Derek now. They asked a stranger to love them because the man who should have loved them couldn't be bothered. And when I looked into their faces, I saw children who deserve what my son never got the chance to have. A father who shows up. A father who remembers their names and their dreams and the things that make them laugh. The lawyer had stopped pacing. "So, yes," Graham continued, "I have a motive. My motive is that I had everything a man could want, and I lost it in a single night. And when I was given the chance to matter to someone again, to be needed in a way that money can't buy, I said yes. Because the alternative was going home to an empty penthouse and an untouched nursery and another decade of wondering what Oliver would have become." His voice cracked on his son's name. He didn't try to hide it. "That's my motive, counselor. I wanted to be a father again. And those girls wanted a father who would actually show up." We found each other. The courtroom remained utterly silent. Judge Morrison set down her pen. But this story doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins 6 weeks earlier in a tea room with a man who had forgotten how to hope in 3 children who refused to stop hoping despite every reason to give up. Let me take you back. The Westbrook Manor had hosted charity galas for nearly a century. Its Victorian architecture and sprawling gardens made it the perfect venue for wealthy donors to feel both cultured and generous, writing checks beneath crystal chandeliers, while sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than some people earned in a week. Graham Foster had attended 17 events at this venue over the past 4 years. He'd written substantial checks at each one. He'd smiled at the right people, shaken the right hands, and left as soon as politeness allowed. Tonight was the Children's Literacy Foundation Gala. Katherine had cared deeply about childhood education. She'd spent her career as a pediatric oncologist, but her passion had always been making sure sick children didn't fall behind in their learning. She'd started a reading program at the hospital, recruiting volunteers to sit with patients and read aloud. Graham funded that program now, had expanded it to 12 hospitals across the state. Katherine's Reading Corner. They called it Her name lived on in the spaces where children still needed stories. But the galas themselves felt like penance rather than purpose. He attended because he should, not because he wanted to. The tea room at Westbrook Manor sat adjacent to the main ballroom, separated by tall windows that allowed a view of the festivities without requiring participation. Graham had discovered it 3 years ago when the noise of celebration had become too much. Now it was his refuge. He sat in a leather armchair at a corner table, a pot of Earl Grey steaming gently beside his cup. Through the windows, he watched donors, an evening wear mingle on the terrace. Champagne flutes caught the dying afternoon light like signals he couldn't read. Oliver would have been 7 now. Graham wondered sometimes what his son would have looked like at this age. Whether he'd have Katherine's dark eyes or Graham's height. Whether he'd have liked soccer or preferred books. Whether he'd have been shy or outgoing, cautious or reckless. The wondering never stopped. It just became background noise, a constant hum of grief that had settled into his bones like an old injury that ached when the weather changed. He lifted his teacup. The warmth felt good against his palms. That's when he saw them. 3 small figures appear at the entrance to the tea room, moving in perfect formation like a miniature reconnaissance team that had rehearsed this approach. They wore identical lavender dresses with different colored sashes, pink, yellow, and blue. Triplets, perhaps 8 years old, maybe younger. Graham's chest constricted before his mind caught up with his body. Children had that effect on him now. Any child roughly Oliver's age triggered something between longing and pain, a reminder of roads not taken, futures not lived. The girls spotted him and exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. Then they walked directly to his table, as if they'd been invited. The one with the pink sash spoke first. Her voice was clear and unafraid. "You're drinking tea." Graham set down his cup carefully. "I am. Mama says people who choose tea when everyone else is drinking fancy wine have good reasons." The yellow sash girl tilted her head, studying him with unsettling focus. "Do you have good reasons?" Graham considered several responses. Deflection, dismissal, a polite suggestion that they return to their parents. Instead, he heard himself say, "I suppose I do. What are they?" The blue sash girl asked. Her eyes were dark and serious, analytical in a way that seemed far too mature for a small face. She looked at him like a scientist, examining an interesting specimen. Graham hesitated. These were strangers. Children, yes, but strangers nonetheless. And yet something in their direct approach, their utter lack of pretense, made him want to answer honestly. "I don't like who I become when I drink," he said. "So I stopped." The girls exchanged another of those meaningful looks. Pink Sash nodded slowly. "That's honest," she said. "We like honest. I'm Maya. This is Ava." She pointed to the yellow sash girl. "And Zoe." The blue sash nodded solemnly. "What's your name?" "Graham Foster." "Are you important?" Maya asked. "Some people think so." "Do you think so?" Graham almost smiled. "Almost. I think importance is relative. I run companies. I employ people. I donate to causes I care about. Whether that makes me important depends on how you define the word." Maya considered this. "Our dad thinks he's important. He represents famous people, athletes and movie stars. He says his time is very valuable. Too valuable for school plays." Ava added quietly. Something shifted in Graham's chest. A protective instinct he'd thought had died with Oliver stirred, like an animal waking from hibernation. "Should I call someone to find your parents?" he asked, even as part of him hoped they'd say no. "Our mom is working," Zoe said, gesturing toward the terrace. Graham followed her gaze and found a woman with a professional camera moving through the crowd. She was capturing candid moments, unobtrusive but purposeful. "She's documenting the gala for the foundation. We're supposed to stay out of trouble. And approaching strange men at their tables is staying out of trouble." "You don't look strange," Maya said matter-of-factly. "You look sad and tired, like you need something, but you don't know what it is." Graham stared at this child. 8 years old, maybe, and she just described the hollow ache that had lived behind his ribs for 4 years with more accuracy than any therapist he'd seen. "We need to ask you something important," Maya continued. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Will you listen? Graham nodded. He couldn't have refused if he'd tried. The three girls leaned closer, a conspiratorial huddle around his small table. We want you to pretend to be our dad. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ripples of confusion spread outward, followed by something Graham couldn't immediately name. Your dad, he repeated. Just for tonight, Ava clarified. Just so our real dad can see that someone else thinks we're worth spending time with. Graham's throat tightened. Why would you need someone pretend? The girls' faces changed. Not dramatically, but Graham saw it. The subtle shift from hopeful to hurt, covered quickly by the kind of practice resilience children shouldn't need to develop. Our real dad is here, Maya said, with his girlfriend. He's supposed to take us for the whole summer, but he keeps saying he's too busy. He cancels our visits. He forgot Zoe's piano recital last month. She practiced for 3 months. Every day, Zoe said quietly. Mrs. Patterson said I was ready for the advance piece. I wanted him to hear it. He said he'd come, Ava added. He put it in his calendar and everything. We saw it on his phone when he showed us, but then he didn't. His girlfriend doesn't like us, Maya continued. She pretends when Dad's watching, but when he's not looking, she calls us the baggage when she's on phone with her friends. We heard her at Christmas. Graham felt his jaw tighten. What kind of man allowed someone to speak about his children that way? What kind of man heard his daughters practicing piano for months and simply didn't show up? But maybe, Maya said, and now her voice held that fragile quality of children who've learned not to expect much but can't stop hoping. If Dad sees someone else being nice to us, someone important, he'll remember that we matter. Maybe he'll try harder. The logic was devastating in its simplicity. These children had reduced their father's neglect to a problem that could be solved with the right leverage. They were strategizing their way toward love because asking for it directly had stopped working. Graham thought of Oliver. He thought of the soccer games he'd never coach, the bedtime stories he'd never tell, the scraped knees he'd never bandage. He thought of his son's face, frozen forever at 3 years old in his memory, never growing older, never asking difficult questions, never disappointing him or making him proud in equal measure. He thought of his own father, too, Richard Foster, who had attended Oliver's memorial service, shaken Graham's hand, offered condolences that sounded rehearsed, and flown back to London within 6 hours, who had barely acknowledged his grandson while Oliver was alive, too focused on his own businesses and his new wife and the life he'd built an ocean away from the family he'd left behind. Graham knew what it felt like to be insufficient, to be an obligation rather than a priority. He just hadn't realized how clearly that wound still throbbed until 3 little girls in lavender dresses stood before him asking for something their father should have given freely. Where is he now? Graham asked. Your father? Maya pointed through the window. Graham followed her gesture and found a tall man in a designer suit, arm wrapped around a woman at least 15 years his junior. The man's back was to the tea room. He had no idea his daughters were 20 feet away. Or if he knew, he didn't care enough to check. His name is Derek Simmons, Ava said. He's a talent agent. Very important, he says. Graham recognized the name. Simmons represented several major athletes and entertainers. He had a reputation for ruthlessness, for making his clients feel like the center of the universe, while everyone else faded to background noise. Apparently, that included his own children. If I agreed to help, Graham said slowly, the words escaping before his better judgment could intervene, what would you need me to do? The girls' faces transformed. The hope that bloomed there was so naked, so vulnerable, that Graham felt like a physical weight settling onto his shoulders. Maya produced a folded piece of paper from her dress pocket, an actual list, written in careful handwriting with different colored pens. Sit with us when Mama brings us dinner, she read. Talk to us about school and stuff. Maybe let Zoe show you her piano hands. Zoe held up her hands immediately, fingers spread wide, demonstrating their worthiness, and asked Mama to dance. She never gets to dance at these things because she's always working. She's really pretty, Ava added seriously, and smart. She won awards for her photographs. She takes pictures of refugees and people in war zones. But Dad called her boring because she'd rather photograph important things than celebrities. She's not boring. She's brave. Graham looked through the window again, finding the woman with the camera. She moved with purpose through the crowd, somehow both present and invisible, capturing moments without disrupting them. Her natural hair was pulled back from her face, and even from this distance, he could see the focus in her posture, the competence, the quiet strength. Not boring at all. What's your mother's name? Simone Carter, Maya said. She kept her name after the divorce. She said it was the only thing she kept that was truly hers. Graham made his decision somewhere between that sentence and his next breath. These girls had seen him sitting alone with his grief and his tea, and instead of looking away, they'd walked toward him with a plan. They'd chosen him, a stranger, because her father had unchosen him so many times that they'd stopped expecting him to care. He knew exactly how that felt. "All right," he said. "I'll help." The girl's eyes went wide, matching expressions of disbelief, then joy, then something fiercer. Determination, maybe, or vindication. "But I have conditions," Graham continued. "No lying to your mother. She needs to know what you've asked me to do, and she needs to agree to it. I won't deceive a parent about something involving her children." The girls nodded eagerly. "And if your father gets aggressive or this causes real conflict, we stop immediately. I won't put you in the middle of adult problems. Do you understand?" More nodding. "One more thing." Graham leaned forward slightly. "Why me? There are dozens of people at this gala. Wealthy people. Important people by your definition. Why approach a man sitting alone in a tea room?" The girls exchanged another of their silent looks. Finally, Zoe answered. Her voice was quiet but certain. "You're drinking tea alone at a party. That means you're used to being different. People who are used to being different are usually kind to other people who don't fit in." Maya added, "And your eyes look like they've cried a lot. Not recently, but before. People who've been really sad sometimes understand other people's sadness better." Graham's chest constricted. Oliver had been intuitive, too. Even at 3, he'd known when Graham was stressed before Graham knew himself, would climb into his lap and pat his face with tiny hands. "It's okay, Daddy. It's okay." Graham didn't tell the girls about Oliver, didn't explain that they'd found the exact right words to describe a grief he couldn't speak aloud, didn't tell them that their father wasn't the only one who had failed at presents, that Graham had worked 60-hour weeks when Oliver was alive because he thought he had unlimited time to make up for it later. He didn't tell them that part of him wondered if this was penance, a chance to do better with someone else's children because he couldn't do better with his own. Some truths were too heavy for 8-year-olds to carry. "You're very perceptive," he managed. "We have to be," Ava said simply. "Nobody pays attention to kids at these things. So we pay attention to everything. It's safer that way." The word safer hit Graham like a physical blow. 8 years old, and they'd already learned that invisibility was protection, that adults couldn't be trusted to see them unless they made themselves useful or interesting or strategic. "Let's go find your mother," Graham said, standing. Together. If you're watching this and wondering where this story leads, whether Graham will keep his promise, whether these girls will get the father they deserve, whether Simone will trust a stranger with her family's fragile hope, hit that subscribe button now. This journey has only just begun, and what happens next will test everything Graham thought he knew about loss, love, and the courage it takes to choose a family that isn't your own. They crossed the tea room and stepped onto the terrace. 3 girls flanking Graham like he belonged to them. Maya took his right hand. Zoe took his left. Ava walked slightly ahead, navigator of their small expedition. Other guests noticed immediately. Graham saw the glances, the raised eyebrows, the whispered questions behind champagne flutes. He was a known quantity at these events. The quiet billionaire who wrote generous checks and left early. He was not known for interacting with children. He was not known for interacting with anyone beyond the minimum required by courtesy. Let them wonder. Let them talk. Graham had spent 4 years caring about appearances, about maintaining the careful facade of a man who had survived tragedy with grace. For once, he didn't care what conclusions people drew. Simone Carter saw them approaching and lowered her camera, confusion crossing her features. Up close, she was striking in a way that photographs couldn't capture. High cheekbones, intelligent eyes that assessed and cataloged with the speed of someone trained to notice details. Skin that glowed warm brown in the late afternoon light. A green dress that moved when she moved, professional but not austere. She positioned herself protectively as she watched the stranger walk toward her with her daughters. "Girls," she said carefully. "Who is this?" "This is Graham Foster," Maya announced, squeezing his hand. "He's going to have dinner with us." Simone's eyes widened slightly. She recognized the name. Most people in certain circles did. But her response wasn't the usual calculation Graham saw when people learned his net worth. No subtle reassessment. No sudden warmth designed to cultivate favor. Instead, her gaze sharpened with protective suspicion. "Is he now?" She looked at Graham directly. "I don't believe we've met, Mr. Foster." "We haven't," Graham said. "Your daughters approached me in the tea room. They have a proposal they'd like to explain. I promised them I wouldn't participate in anything without your knowledge and consent." Simone's expression flickered. Surprise, then wariness, then something that might have been respect for his directness. What kind of proposal? Before anyone could answer, a voice cut through the evening air. "Simone, I didn't know you'd be here." Derek Simmons approached with his girlfriend trailing behind him, her heels clicking in irritated rhythm on the stone terrace. His smile was practiced, charming and utterly hollow. The kind of smile that worked on people who didn't know him well enough to see the emptiness behind it. "I'm working, Derek," Simone said evenly. "Like always." Derek's gaze slid to Graham, calculating, assessing, trying to determine threat level, social status, whether this stranger represented an obstacle or an opportunity. "And who's this?" "Graham Foster." Graham offered his hand with the same firm grip he used in boardrooms when he wanted someone to know exactly who held the power. "Friend of the family." He watched Derek process the name, watched the recognition land, the mental recalibration as Derek realized that his ex-wife was standing beside a man worth considerably more than his entire client roster combined. "Friend of the family," Derek repeated. His smile remained fixed, but tension had crept into his shoulders. "How interesting. The girls have never mentioned you." "We just met him," Maya said truthfully. "But he's really nice." "Nicer than some people," Ava added, looking pointedly at the girlfriend hovering behind Derek. The girlfriend, whose name Graham still didn't know and had no interest in learning, rolled her eyes with theatrical boredom. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Girls, why didn't you come say hello properly? Yvette has been asking about you." None of the three girls moved. Graham felt Maya's hand tighten in his, felt Zoe shift slightly closer to his side. "We're having dinner with Mr. Foster," Zoe said quietly. He already said yes. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Derek looked at his daughters, then at Graham, then at Simone. Something moved behind his eyes. Not hurt, not concern for his children's affection wandering elsewhere. Something colder. Proprietary. "Simone, can we speak privately?" "Whatever you need to say, you can say here." "Fine." Derek's voice dropped, but not enough to prevent nearby guests from hearing. "I don't appreciate my daughters being paraded in front of strangers. Whatever game you're playing, it stops now." Graham felt anger rise in his chest, hot and immediate, but Simone beat him to the response. "The only game being played," she said, her voice steady as steel, "is the one where you pretend to care about your daughters once a month. Graham has shown more genuine interest in talking to them in 5 minutes than you have in 6 months. So maybe examine your own behavior before criticizing mine." The surrounding conversations had died. Other guests were watching now, drawn by the tension radiating from their small group. Derek noticed. His smile returned, strained and dangerous. "We'll discuss this later, girls. I'll see you next weekend." "No, you won't," Zoe said softly. "You'll cancel. You always do." The truth hit Derek like a physical blow. Graham saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes widened slightly, the micro-expression of someone caught in a lie they convinced themselves no one would notice. But instead of apologizing, instead of kneeling down to his daughter's level and promising to do better, Derek turned and walked away. Yvette tottered after him on her expensive heels. already pulling out her phone to document the drama for whoever she gossiped with. The girls didn't watch him go. They'd already looked away. Simone pulled all three of them close, one arm reaching around Maya and Zoe, the other finding Ava. "You girls did nothing wrong," she murmured against their hair. "Your father's issues are his own." "We know, Mama," Maya said, but her voice was small. Hurt. Graham stood slightly apart, suddenly aware that he was witnessing something intensely private. A mother comforting children who'd learned to expect disappointment. A family unit that had formed despite the absence of its fourth member rather than because of him. He should leave. Should offer his card, make polite excuses. Disappear back into the tea room where he belonged. Instead, he said, "I understand there's a dinner happening soon. Would you still like company?" Simone looked up at him over her daughters' heads. Her eyes were wet but fierce, protective and exhausted, and searching for something in his face that would tell her whether he could be trusted. Graham didn't try to look trustworthy. He just looked back. Let her see whatever she needed to see. "The girls told you their plan," Simone said. It wasn't a question. "They did. And you agreed to it. I agreed to have dinner with your family and to be honest with you about what they asked. Beyond that, nothing happens without your consent." Simone studied him for a long moment. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you involve yourself in someone else's mess?" Graham glanced down at the three upturned faces watching him. Maya, fierce and strategic. Ava, artistic and observant. Zoe, quiet and perceptive. "Because they were brave enough to ask," he said. "And I had nothing better to do than drink tea alone and feel sorry for myself. They offered me a chance to be useful to someone. That's not nothing." Simone's expression shifted. Something softened around her eyes. "Dinner's in an hour," she said. "Table 14 near the garden. If you're serious about this, you can tell me more about yourself while we wait. I don't let strangers near my children without knowing who they are. That seems fair. It's not negotiable." Graham almost smiled. Almost. I wouldn't expect it to be. The gardens of Westbrook Manor were designed for intimate conversations. Winding paths, stone benches tucked into alcoves, hedges high enough to create privacy without complete isolation. Graham found himself walking beside Simone while the girls ran ahead, their earlier sadness already transforming into excitement about whatever came next. The resilience of children never stopped being remarkable and heartbreaking. "So," Simone said, her camera now hanging at her side rather than raise a document. "Graham Foster. I know the name. Everyone in the nonprofit world knows the name. You fund half the children's programs in this state." "I have resources," Graham said. "It seems reasonable to use them for something worthwhile." That's a very modest way to describe giving away hundreds of millions of dollars. Modesty isn't the point. The work is the point. Simone glanced at him sideways. "My daughter said you look sad, that you seem like someone who'd cried a lot. Were they right?" The directness startled him, but he'd promised honesty, and Simone struck him as someone who would recognize deflection immediately. "Yes," he said, "they were right. Do you want to tell me why, or should I respect your privacy?" Graham watched the girls disappear around a hedge, their laughter floating back through the evening air. "My wife and son died 4 years ago," he said. "Car accident. The other driver was intoxicated. He walked away with minor injuries. Katherine and Oliver didn't walk away at all." Simone stopped walking. Graham stopped beside her. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were simple, unadorned. No platitudes about time healing or reasons happening. Just acknowledgement. "Thank you." "Oliver," Simone repeated quietly. "How old?" 3. She was silent for a moment. Then, "The girls are 8. When I look at them, I sometimes try to remember what they were like at 3. The way they talked, the things that made them laugh. It's already fading. I hate that it's fading." Graham's throat tightened. "I have videos," he said, "of Oliver. I watch them sometimes. His voice, his face, they're frozen. He never gets older in those videos. He never changes. Part of me is grateful for that. Part of me wishes I could see who he might have become." The girls' laughter echoed from somewhere in the garden. "Real children, growing and changing. Is that why you said yes?" Simone asked, because of Oliver? Partly, but also because they reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That being needed matters. That showing up for someone, especially someone who doesn't expect you to show up, is worth more than all the money in the world. Simone started walking again. Graham matched her pace. My ex-husband doesn't understand that, she said. Derek thinks presents can be bought. He thinks expensive gifts and occasional appearances are enough. He doesn't understand that children remember who was there, not who sent packages. Some people never learn that lesson. Some people never try. They walked in silence for a while. The evening light was softening, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. I won't let you hurt them, Simone said eventually. Maya, Ava, Zoe, they've already been hurt enough. If you're doing this for entertainment or to feel good about yourself, or because you're bored with your billionaire life, I need you to walk away now, before they get attached. Graham stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I'm not doing this for entertainment, he said. I'm doing this because your daughters walked up to a stranger and asked for help, and I remember what it feels like to need help and have no one offer it. I'm doing this because I have an empty house and an empty calendar and a life that looks full from the outside but feels hollow from the inside. And I'm doing this because when Maya took my hand, it was the first time in 4 years that someone touched me like they actually wanted me there. Simone's eyes searched his face. That's a lot of honesty for a first meeting. You strike me as someone who would notice if I held back. I'd rather be honest and have you tell me to leave than pretend and have you discover the truth later. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. The girls have good instincts, she said. They don't usually approach strangers. The fact that they approach you, that they trusted you enough to share their plan, that means something. Does it mean you'll let me stay for dinner? Simone considered. It means I'll let you stay for dinner, and we'll see what happens. No promises beyond tonight. No assumptions about what comes next. Just dinner and conversation, and the chance to prove you're worth trusting. Fair terms. They're the only terms I have. The girls came running back, breathless and grass-stained despite their fancy dresses. Ava had somehow acquired a flower from one of the garden beds and tucked it behind her ear. Mama, dinner's starting, Maya announced. They're ringing the bell and everything. Simone looked at Graham. Last chance to change your mind. Graham looked at the 3 girls looking up at him with matching expressions of hope and determination. I'm not changing my mind, he said. They walked toward the dining tent together. Graham felt eyes on them, felt the weight of assumption and speculation. The billionaire and the photographer and the 3 little girls in lavender dresses. Let them wonder. For the first time in 4 years, Graham Foster had somewhere to be, and several someones who wanted him there. Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. Table 14 sat near the garden entrance, close enough to catch the evening breeze, but far enough from the main action to allow conversation. Graham found himself flanked by Zoe on his left and Maya on his right, with Ava across the table next to Simone. The girls had clearly inherited their mother's directness. What's your house like? Maya asked between bites of chicken. Is it huge? Do you have a swimming pool? Do you have servants? Maya, Simone said mildly, Mr. Foster's personal life is his own business. It's all right, Graham said. My house is large, yes? I have a pool that I rarely use. And I don't have servants, but I do have a housekeeper named Mrs. Chun who keeps everything running and judges my eating habits. Judges how? Zoe asked. She leaves passive-aggressive notes on the refrigerator about the importance of vegetables. The last one included a hand-drawn diagram of the food pyramid. The girls giggled. Simone's lips twitched. She sounded like a good person. Ava said seriously, people who care about vegetables usually care about other important things too. She is a good person, Graham agreed. She's worked for me for 12 years. She knew my wife. The word wife created a small ripple of silence. Mr. Foster was married. Simone explained gently to her daughters. His wife passed away. Like Grandma Eleanor? Maya asked, something like that. The girls absorbed this information with the particular solemnity children reserve for death. We're sorry, Zoe said formally. That must have been very sad. It was, Graham said. It still is sometimes. But talking about her helps. She would have liked you three. She was a doctor for children, and she always said kids were more honest than adults. We are honest, Ava confirmed. Mama says lying makes your soul heavy, and who needs extra weight? Graham laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprising him as it escaped. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. Simone watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. The dinner continued. The girls asked questions, endless questions, about his work, his hobbies, his favorite color, whether he preferred cats or dogs. Graham answered everything honestly. He ran a real estate development company. He didn't have hobbies anymore, but used to play chess. Blue. Dogs. But he didn't have one because it seemed unfair to leave an animal alone all day. You should get a dog, Maya said firmly. Dogs are good for lonely people. They make you go outside, and they're always happy to see you. I'll consider it. Don't just consider it. Do it. Considering is what Dad does, and he never actually does anything. The casual comparison between Graham and Derek landed unexpectedly in the center of the table. Simone set down her fork. Graham looked at the girls, at their faces that held too much wisdom for their years. Your father loves you, he said carefully, even when he doesn't show it well, even when he makes mistakes. You don't have to say that, Zoe said quietly. People always say that, but it's not always true. Sometimes people just aren't good at loving. Sometimes they're too busy or too selfish or too scared. Mama explained it to us. Graham glanced at Simone, who looked both proud of her daughter's insight and heartbroken that she needed to develop it. Your mother is wise, Graham said. We know, all three girls said in unison. After the main course, the girls wanted to explore the dessert table. Simone hesitated, but the table was visible from their seats, and the girls promised to stay together. They're remarkable, Graham said once the children were out of earshot. They've had to be. Simone pushed her plate aside. I hate that they've had to be 8 years old, and they already understand emotional unavailability, manipulation, conditional love. That's not childhood. That's survival training. You've taught them resilience. I've taught them to expect disappointment. There's a difference. There's also a difference between preparing them for reality and making them bitter. They're not bitter. They're hopeful. The fact that they approached me at all proves that. Simone looked toward the dessert table, where Ava was carefully deliberating between chocolate cake and fruit tart while Maya lobbied aggressively for both. When Derek and I divorced, she said, I thought shared custody would work. I thought he'd want to be part of their lives, even if he didn't want to be part of mine. He fought for visitation rights. Actual legal battle. I thought that meant he cared. What changed? Nothing changed. That's the problem. The visits started getting canceled almost immediately. Work emergencies, client crises, schedule conflicts. Always something more important than three little girls who dressed up and made cards and planned activities. Simone's voice remained steady, but Graham heard the pain beneath it. After the first year, I stopped preparing them for his visits. I learned to have backup plans, alternative activities, ways to fill the time when he inevitably didn't show. They learned to protect themselves by expecting nothing. And I learned that fighting for custody means nothing if you're not willing to actually be present once you've won. Has he always been like this? No. Or maybe yes. Maybe I just didn't see it. He was charming when we met, ambitious, full of big plans and bigger promises. I was young and stupid, and I thought ambition meant dedication to all parts of life, not just career. By the time the girls were born, I realized he only had room for one priority, and it wasn't going to be us. Graham listened without interrupting. There was something cathartic in her telling, like she'd held this story inside for too long, and it was spilling out now that someone was willing to receive it. The divorce was almost a relief, Simone continued. I could stop pretending we were a happy family. Stop making excuses for why Daddy was working late again. Stop hoping things would change. But I never wanted the girls to feel unwanted. I never wanted them to have to scheme for their father's attention. They're doing what children do, Graham said. They're trying to solve a problem with the tools they have. It's not manipulation. It's desperation wrapped in strategy. Simone looked at him. Really looked. You understand them, she said. Not just intellectually. You actually understand. I know what it's like to want someone to choose you, to want it so badly you'd accept even pretend affection, because real affection seems impossible. The words hung between them. Simone didn't ask him to explain. She just nodded, accepting his partial truth without demanding the rest. The girls are coming back, she said. Whatever happens tonight, whatever this becomes or doesn't become, thank you for showing up, for taking them seriously, for treating their plan like it mattered. It does matter, Graham said. They matter. Mama. Ava rushed up to the table, a plate precariously balanced in her hands. They have chocolate mousse and cheesecake, and Maya tried to steal my strawberry. I didn't steal it, I redistributed it. That's just stealing with extra steps. Simone stood to mediate the dessert dispute, and the moment of intimacy broke into the cheerful chaos of motherhood. But Graham caught her eye across the table, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the beginning of trust. Across the dining tent, Graham noticed Derek watching their table. His expression had shifted from the practiced charm of earlier to something harder, possessive, calculating. Whatever happened next, Graham realized, was going to be complicated. He looked at the three girls arguing over dessert, at Simone trying to negotiate a fair distribution of strawberries, at the small family that had welcomed him into their chaos for reasons he still didn't fully understand. Complicated was fine. Complicated was better than empty. The weeks that followed reshaped Graham's life in ways he hadn't anticipated. It started with small things. A Saturday afternoon at Simone's house, a modest two-story in a neighborhood where children's bikes littered driveways and basketball hoops stood sentinel in every third yard. The house smelled like baking and coffee and the particular chaos of 3 8-year-olds who had recently discovered the art of slime making. Graham arrived at 10 in the morning, uncertain of his welcome despite the invitation. Maya answered the door before he could knock. You came. She threw her arms around his waist with the unguarded affection of a child who hadn't yet learned to protect herself from disappointment. Mama said you would, but I wanted to make sure. I said I would come, Graham replied. I keep my promises. Something flickered in Maya's eyes. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of belief. The house was small by Graham's standards, but felt larger because of the life that filled it. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator, held in place by alphabet magnets. A half-finished puzzle occupied the coffee table. Books were stacked on every available surface, well-worn paperbacks with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. It looked like a home. Graham's penthouse looked like a showroom. Zoe found him in the living room, already holding a deck of cards. We're going to teach you our game, she announced. It's called Triple Threat. We invented it. Triple Threat, Graham repeated. Should I be worried? Probably, Ava said, appearing from somewhere with a notebook. There are a lot of rules. The game, as it turned out, had approximately 47 rules, most of which seemed to change depending on which girl was winning. Graham lost spectacularly and repeatedly. He didn't mind. For the first time in 4 years, losing felt like winning. Simone watched from the kitchen doorway, a cup of coffee in her hands. Graham caught her eye during a particularly confusing round involving something called a reverse triple flip, and she smiled. Not the professional smile from the gala, a real one. 2 weekends later, Derek was supposed to take the girls for Saturday and Sunday, his first visit in 6 weeks. The girls had dressed in their favorite outfits, packed overnight bags, prepared lists of things they wanted to do. They sat by the window at 9 in the morning, watching for his car. By 11, Simone had started pacing the kitchen, her phone gripped in her hand. By noon, the text arrived. Graham was dropping off art supplies for Ava, watercolors and canvases, and a book about famous painters he'd found at a specialty shop. He walked into the kitchen and saw Simone staring at her phone, her face carefully blank. Work emergency, she said flatly. Client crisis in Los Angeles. He's very sorry. Next time for sure. Graham set down the bag of supplies. The girls? In the living room. They heard the text notification. They know. He found them sitting in a row on the couch, still wearing their carefully chosen outfits. Maya was holding Ava's hand. Zoe was staring at her overnight bag like it had betrayed her. None of them were crying. That felt worse somehow. They'd moved beyond tears into the territory of resigned acceptance. "I brought something," Graham said, sitting on the coffee table facing them. "I know it's not what you were expecting today, but I thought maybe if you wanted, we could have an art day instead." Zoe looked up. "An art day?" "I have watercolors and canvases, and a book about artists who painted gardens. Mrs. Chin made enough sandwiches to feed an army, because I mentioned I might have company. We could go to my house and paint and eat too many sandwiches and see if Professor Whiskers gets along with my housekeeper." The girls exchanged glances. "You want us to come to your house?" Ava asked carefully. "If your mother says it's okay. And only if you want to. No pressure." Maya stood up, walked over to where he sat, and studied his face with unnerving intensity. "You're not going to cancel later, are you?" The question contained multitudes. "I'm not going to cancel," Graham said. "Not today. Not ever, if I can help it." Maya nodded once, apparently satisfied. "Okay," she said, "but we need to bring Professor Whiskers. He gets lonely." Graham glanced toward the kitchen, where Simone stood in the doorway. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Is this all right?" he asked her. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The girls are never alone with anyone without my supervision. That was a rule. You're welcome to come too. Encouraged, actually. Mrs. Chin will judge me significantly less about the sandwich consumption if there are witnesses." Simone's mouth twitched. "Get your things, girls," she said, "and find a cat carrier. We're going to see how the other half lives." If you ever watch children learn to trust again, you know how fragile that process can be. One broken promise can undo months of careful building. One disappointment can teach them that hope is dangerous. But sometimes, if you're lucky, someone comes along who understands that showing up is the beginning of everything. Keep watching, because this story is about to get complicated in ways none of them expected. Graham's house was not what the girls expected. It was enormous. Yes, modern glass and steel, perched on a hill with views of the city. But it was also silent in a way that felt heavy, empty in a way that went beyond furniture. "Where's all your stuff?" Maya asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast living room. "What do you mean?" "Like pictures and magnets and things you made. Our house has stuff everywhere. This house has space." Graham looked around at his showroom home through the eyes of an 8-year-old and saw it for what it was: a monument to absence, a place to sleep rather than a place to live. "I used to have more stuff," he said. "It's in storage now." "Why?" Because looking at photographs of Katherine and Oliver made him feel like his chest was caving in. Because he removed everything that reminded him of them, and somehow removed himself in the process. "Sometimes when you lose someone," Graham said carefully, "it hurts to be reminded of them, so you put the reminders away, thinking that will help, but it doesn't really help. It just makes everything feel empty." Zoe slipped her hand into his, small fingers intertwining with his larger ones. "Maybe you should bring some of it back," she said. "Empty is worse than sad." Graham's throat tightened. "Maybe you're right," he managed. Mrs. Chin emerged from the kitchen with a tray of sandwiches and a suspicious expression that melted into surprised delight when she saw the children. "Mr. Foster," she said, setting down the tray, "you didn't tell me we were having young guests. I would have made cookies." "We like sandwiches," Ava assured her, "especially if they have the crust cut off." "The crusts are already removed. Mr. Foster has particular opinions about bread crusts." Graham felt his face warm slightly. "I have texture preferences." "He's particular," Mrs. Chin said to the girls, her eyes twinkling. "About crusts, about vegetables, about coffee temperature. Particular is a polite word for fussy." The girls giggled. Simone appeared from the entryway, having paused to take in the house. Her camera bag hung at her side, a professional habit. "This is quite a place," she said neutrally. "It's too big," Graham said. "I bought it because Katherine liked the views. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to sell it, but I've never filled it." Simone looked at him with something like understanding. "Some spaces are hard to fill," she said. "Some spaces are meant to stay open for a while." The art day unfolded organically. Graham set up an impromptu studio in what had been designed as a formal dining room, covering the expensive table with plastic sheets and setting out supplies. The girls dove into painting with abandon. Ava worked on a detailed landscape. Maya attempted something abstract involving a lot of red. Zoe painted what she called emotional animals, a sad elephant, a hopeful giraffe, a confused octopus. Simone captured it all with her camera, moving quietly around the room, finding angles Graham wouldn't have thought to look for. At one point, she caught him watching her work. "What?" she asked. "You're very good at that, being invisible while seeing everything." Occupational requirement. The best photographs happen when people forget you're there. The girls said you photograph refugees. War zones. Simone lowered her camera. "I did. Before them. After the divorce, I shifted to events and portraits. More stability, better hours, less danger. Do you miss it? The danger? No. The purpose, yes." She looked at her daughters, all three absorbed in their paintings. "But this is purpose, too. Just different, smaller but deeper." Graham nodded. He understood small purposes. He understood that depth could be found in inches as well as miles. Mrs. Chin served lunch in the kitchen, which had never hosted this many people. The girls chattered through their sandwiches, debating the merits of various paint colors, asking Mrs. Chin about her family, explaining their school projects to Graham with the detailed enthusiasm of children who had found an attentive audience. Afterward, Zoe asked to see the piano. Graham had a grand piano in what the architect called the salon. He'd bought it for Katherine, who had played beautifully. It sat now in the corner, dusty, untouched since she died. "I don't play," Graham said. "Not anymore." "But I play," Zoe said. "Can I show you? I've been practicing something new." Graham looked at the piano. For years of silence. For years of avoiding the room entirely because the absence of Katherine's music hurt too much. "Yes," he said. "I'd like that." Zoe sat at the bench, her feet not quite reaching the pedals. She adjusted the seat, straightened her back, positioned her small hands over the keys, and she played. The piece was simple, a children's recital standard. But Zoe played it with complete focus, complete presence, complete absorption in the music. Graham watched her and felt something crack open in his chest. Not grief, not loss, something else. Something like the first green shoots pushing through frozen ground after a long winter. When Zoe finished, she looked at him anxiously. "Was that okay?" "That was beautiful," Graham said. His voice came out rough. "Truly beautiful." Zoe beamed. Maya and Ava had gathered in the doorway, Simone behind them. "This is what she played at the recital," Maya said. "The one Dad missed." Graham looked at Zoe, who was still sitting at the piano, her hands resting on keys that hadn't been touched in 4 years. "Then your father missed something wonderful," Graham said. "And that's his loss, not yours." Zoe's eyes went bright with tears she didn't let fall. "He never says things like that," she whispered. "He never says it's his loss." "Then he's wrong, and I'm sorry he can't see what he's missing. But I see it. Your mother sees it. And someday I hope he sees it too. But if he doesn't, that's about him, not about you." Simone crossed the room and knelt beside Zoe, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "I love you," she murmured against Zoe's hair. "All 3 of you. So much." The girls clustered around their mother, a small knot of family that Graham watched from the outside. But Ava reached out and grabbed his hand, pulling him into the huddle. "You too," she said. "You're a part of this now." Graham Foster, billionaire, owner of empty houses and emptier days, stood in a group hug with 3 8-year-olds and their mother and felt, for the first time since Katherine died, like he might actually belong somewhere. The winter recital arrived on a Friday evening in December. Zoe had practiced for 3 months. The advanced piece, Mrs. Patterson had said, ready for the big stage. Simone helped her dress in her performance outfit, a navy blue dress with a ribbon sash. Maya did her hair. Ava applied exactly 2 dots of clear lip gloss and declared her professionally prepared. Derek had confirmed he would attend, had put it in his calendar, had texted 3 days before to ask what time doors opened. Graham sat in the second row with Mrs. Chun, who had insisted on coming. "I haven't heard live piano since my nephew's wedding," she'd said, "and that child plays better than the professionals." The auditorium filled with parents and grandparents, siblings and friends. Simone moved through the crowd, camera ready, documenting families she would later provide with memories of this night. One seat in the front row remained empty. The program began. Children of various ages performed various pieces, with varying levels of success. The audience applauded generously for each one, the universal support of parents watching children try. Zoe was sixth on the program. Graham watched the empty seat. At 7:15, Simone sat down beside him. "He's not coming," she said quietly. "I texted. He's stuck in a meeting." "A meeting?" "An important client. Someone who needs him more than his daughter does, apparently." Graham looked at the empty seat, then at the stage, where the fifth performer was taking their bow. "Excuse me," he said. He stood, moved down the row, and took the empty seat in the front row. He felt Simone's eyes on him, felt the weight of the gesture. Zoe walked onto stage. Her eyes scanned the audience, looking for the face she hoped to see. Found the empty space next to Graham. Her face started to fall. Then she found Graham. Their eyes met. He nodded, smiled. She straightened her spine, walked to the piano, and sat down. The piece was Chopin, far beyond what most 8-year-olds attempted. Zoe played it flawlessly. Not perfectly. There were technical errors a professional would catch, but flawlessly in the way that mattered, with heart, with presence, with the kind of courage that comes from being seen. When she finished, Graham was on his feet before the last note faded, applauding until his palms stung. The rest of the audience followed. Zoe stood, bowed, and when she looked at Graham, she was smiling. Not the smile of a child who had gotten what she wanted, the smile of a child who had realized that sometimes the people who show up are more important than the people who are supposed to. After the recital, the girls crowded around Graham in the lobby. Maya and Ava had watched from backstage, helping with curtains and programs. "You sat in Dad's seat," Maya said. Not accusatory. Observational. "I didn't want Zoe to see it empty when she looked for him." "Did you know he wasn't coming?" "I suspected." Maya processed this. "Mom says we should keep expecting him to change because he's our father. But I don't think he's going to change. I think this is just who he is." Graham knelt down to her level. "Maybe, maybe not. People can change, but only if they want to. Your father might change someday. Or he might not. Either way, you three have the right to expect more from the adults in your lives. You have the right to be shown up for." Zoe, still in her performance dress, pushed through her sisters to hug Graham. "Thank you," she said against his chest, "for being there." Graham held her, this child who wasn't his, this small person who had opened a door he thought was permanently closed. "I'll always be there," he said, "whenever you need me." Simone stood apart from the group, watching. Her camera hung at her side, and used. When the girls finally released Graham to collect congratulations from their grandmother, who had arrived separately, Simone approached. "You keep surprising me," she said. "Is that good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet." Graham smiled slightly. Fair enough. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the girls chatter with their grandmother, a woman named Eleanor who had raised Simone with the same fierce love Simone now showed her daughters. "He's never going to be what they need," Simone said finally. "Derek, I keep hoping he'll become that person. But tonight proved it. He didn't even call with an excuse. Just a text. His daughter played Chopin and he sent a text. What does that mean for you? For them? I don't know yet. But I know that watching you sit in his empty seat and seeing Zoe's face when she realized someone had shown up for her, that moment clarified something I've been avoiding." "What's that?" Simone looked at him. "That maybe the girls were right. Maybe finding someone else, someone who actually wants to be present, is more important than waiting for their father to remember they exist." Graham felt the weight of the implications settle onto his shoulders. Not unwelcome, but significant. "I'm not looking to replace anyone," he said carefully. "I know. But I'm not looking to disappear, either. Whatever this is, whatever we're building here, I want to see where it goes." Simone didn't respond immediately. The noise of the lobby continued around them. Families celebrating, children chattering, the ordinary chaos of recital night. "Let me think about it," she finally said. "About where this goes. About what it means for the girls. I need to be sure that whatever happens, they're protected. Take all the time you need. You say that now. What about in 6 months, when the novelty wears off? When my schedule is chaotic and the girls are cranky and the reality of single motherhood isn't as charming as it seems at first?" Graham thought about the past 2 months, about triple threat and art supplies and Saturday afternoons in a house that finally felt like home, about a piano playing music again after 4 years of silence, about 3 little girls who had taught him that grief doesn't have to be permanent, that empty spaces can be filled, that hope is worth the risk of disappointment. "In 6 months," he said, "I'll still be showing up, and in a year, and in 5. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. Because you matter. Because they matter. Because I've learned the hard way that waiting for someday means missing today. And I'm done missing today." Simone's eyes searched his face. Whatever she found there must have satisfied something, because she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's see where this goes." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. It was an opening. But an opening was all Graham needed. He'd spent 4 years in closed rooms behind locked doors, surrounded by walls he'd built to keep grief contained. Now someone was offering him a window. 3 someones, actually 4 if you counted Simone. He intended to climb through it. The night after the recital, Graham couldn't sleep. He stood at the windows of his penthouse, looking out at the city lights scattered below like fallen stars. The piano sat in the corner of the salon, no longer dusty. Mrs. Chun had cleaned it after Zoe's visit, and somehow its presence in the room had shifted from painful to something else. Possibility, maybe. His phone buzzed. A text from Simone. "The girls are finally asleep. They haven't stopped talking about you. Maya wants to know if you can come to her science fair next month. Zoe wants piano lessons at your house. Ava drew you a picture of Biscuit, the 3-legged dog from the shelter. Apparently you're supposed to adopt him." Graham smiled at his phone screen, then typed back. "Tell Maya I already put the science fair on my calendar. Tell Zoe she can practice on Katherine's piano whenever she wants. And tell Ava I'll look into Biscuit tomorrow." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You're making it very hard to keep my guard up. Graham Foster." He considered his response for a long moment, then stopped keeping it up. The 3 dots again. A full minute passed. "I'm scared. Not of you. Of what happens if this works. And what happens if it doesn't." Graham understood that fear intimately. He'd lived inside it for 4 years. The terror of opening yourself to loss again, of giving the universe another target to aim at. He typed slowly, choosing each word. "I'm scared too. But I've learned that fear of loss doesn't protect you from loss. It just robs you the joy that makes loss worth risking. Katherine taught me that. I forgot it after she died. Your daughters reminded me." Another long pause. "Can we talk?" "Not text. Actually talk. The girls are asleep, and I have a baby monitor app. I could sit on the porch if you want to come over. Or we could video call. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He shouldn't have driven. It was late. He was tired. And showing up at her house in the middle of the night. Sent a message he wasn't sure he was ready to send. But he drove anyway. Simone was waiting on her porch swing when he arrived. She'd changed out of her recital clothes into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. A mug of something steaming sat on the railing beside her. Graham climbed the porch steps and sat on the swing beside her. Not too close. Not too far. The distance of people still figuring out where they stood. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking." They sat in silence for a while. The neighborhood was quiet. Just a distant sound of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. "Tell me about Katherine," Simone said finally. "Not the public version. The real one." Graham looked out at the dark street. She was brilliant. Pediatric oncologist, top of her field. But that's not what made her remarkable. What made her remarkable was the way she saw people. Really saw them. She could walk into a room full of strangers and within an hour know everyone's story, everyone's fear, everyone's hidden hope. "How did you meet?" At a hospital fundraiser. Ironic, given everything. I was there writing a check, trying to look charitable. She was there because one of her patients had drawn a picture for the silent auction, and she wanted to make sure it sold. She saw me standing alone in the corner and walked straight over and said, "You look like someone who needs a purpose bigger than your bank account." I was offended for about 3 seconds. Then I realized she was right. Simone smiled slightly. She sounds direct. Terrifyingly so, but kind with it. She could tell you uncomfortable truths in a way that made you want to be better instead of defensive. And Oliver? Graham's throat tightened. He rarely spoke Oliver's name aloud. It felt like handling something precious and fragile. Oliver was 3 when he died. He had Katherine's eyes and my stubbornness. He was afraid of thunder, but loved the rain. He wanted to be a firefighter or a dinosaur when he grew up. He couldn't decide which. Simone reached over and took his hand. Didn't say anything, just held on. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Katherine was picking Oliver up from preschool. They were driving home. A man named Richard Brennan ran a red light at 40 miles an hour. He'd been drinking since noon. Business lunch. He said at the trial, celebrating a deal. Graham's voice remained steady, but he felt the familiar pressure behind his eyes. Katherine died on impact. Oliver lived for 3 hours. I got to the hospital in time to hold him while he went. He was unconscious. The doctors said he wasn't in pain. I've never known if that was true, or if they just wanted me to believe it. Simone's grip on his hand tightened. Richard Brennan served 18 months. Good behavior. He's out now, living somewhere in Florida. He sent me a letter once, about a year after the trial. Said he was sorry. Said he thought about them every day. I burned it without reading past the first paragraph. Do you hate him? Graham considered the question. He'd asked himself the same thing countless times. I did. For a long time, I did. But hate takes energy, and I ran out of energy. Now I just feel empty when I think about him. Not forgiveness. Not rage. Just nothing. He's irrelevant. He took everything that mattered, and now he's irrelevant. Simone was quiet for a long moment. After my divorce, she said, I spent months trying to make Derek into a villain, trying to hate him for leaving, for choosing his career over us, for being absent. But hate doesn't work when there's shared custody. When you have to see the person, communicate with them, pretend to be civil for the sake of your children. So I stopped hating, stopped feeling much of anything about him at all. Now, he's just a problem to be managed, a complication, not a person I once loved. Does that feel better or worse? Both. Neither. It feels like survival. They sat with that word hanging between them. Survival. The thing that came after catastrophe. Neither victory nor defeat, just continued existence. The girls asked me something once. Simone said, right after I told them we were getting divorced. They asked if I still loved their father. And I said yes, because that's what you're supposed to say. But the truth was more complicated. I loved who I thought he was, who I hoped he'd become. But the person he actually was, I don't know if I ever really knew him. Katherine used to say that most people fall in love with potential, not reality. That staying in love requires accepting the reality even when the potential fades. She sounded very wise. She was. I wasn't wise enough to appreciate it while she was alive. I worked too much, missed too many dinners, told myself I had time to make up for it later. Graham's voice cracked slightly. Oliver was 3 when he died. I missed his 2nd birthday for a business trip to Tokyo. Katherine took photos, sent videos, but I wasn't there. I told myself I'd be there for the 3rd birthday, the 4th, the 10th. I told myself there would always be more time. There's never as much time as we think, Simone said quietly. No, there isn't. The porch swing creaked gently as it moved. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed. I spent 4 years punishing myself, Graham said. For the birthdays I missed, the dinners I skipped, the moments I traded for meetings that seemed important at the time and now seem meaningless. I built companies and funded hospitals and gave away more money than most people see in a lifetime, and none of it filled the hole. What changed? Graham looked at Simone. Her face in the dim porch light was open, waiting. 3 little girls in lavender dresses walked up to my table and asked me to pretend to be their father. And when I said yes, I realized I wasn't pretending at all. I was just doing what I should have done all along. Showing up, being present, choosing people over productivity. Simone's eyes were wet in the darkness. I can't promise I won't disappoint you, Graham said. I can't promise I won't make mistakes or work too late or forget important things. But I can promise that when I do, I'll try again. I'll keep showing up because I've learned that perfection isn't the point. Presence is the point. Consistency is the point. Being the kind of person who keeps their word even when it's inconvenient. That's a significant promise. It's the only promise worth making. Simone leaned her head against his shoulder. A small gesture, but it felt monumental. 2 people who had learned the hard way that trust was fragile, choosing to trust anyway. The girls are going to want you around more, she said. You understand that, right? If we continue this, whatever this is, they're going to attach. They already have. Maya talks about you constantly. Ava draws pictures of your house. Zoe asks about the piano every day. I want to be around more. Even when it's hard. Even when they're sick and cranky and fighting with each other. Even when I'm stressed from work and snapping at everyone. Even when the reality of 3 8-year-olds stops being charming and starts being exhausting. Especially then. Simone lifted her head and looked at him. Really looked. I'm going to kiss you now, she said. Unless you have objections. No objections. The kiss was soft at first. Tentative. 2 people who had been burned by loss. Testing whether fire was worth risking again. Then it deepened. Became something more urgent. More necessary. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing harder than they should have been. Okay, Simone said. Okay, we're doing this. We're doing this. Graham agreed. The girls are going to be impossible. They're going to be thrilled. Same thing with triplets. Graham laughed. Actually laughed. The sound unfamiliar and wonderful. For the first time in 4 years, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. 2 weeks later, Graham invited Simone and the girls to his company's annual charity gala. The event had started as Katherine's idea a decade ago, a way to combine Graham's business connections with her passion for pediatric medicine. Every year, Foster Holdings hosted 500 guests at a different venue, raising millions for children's health research. Katherine had helped plan the first 5. Graham had endured the last 4 alone, showing up because the cause mattered, leaving early because everything else was unbearable. This year felt different. I want you there, he told Simone over dinner at her house. The girls were doing homework at the kitchen table, occasionally interjecting opinions about everything from menu choices to dress codes. Not as my event coordinator or my photographer, as my partner. The word hung in the air. Simone set down her fork. Partner is a significant word. I meant it to be. The society pages will have a field day. Billionaire debuts new family. You know how those stories go. I know. I've spent years avoiding them. But I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending that my life is just business meetings and charitable donations. I want people to know that I have something worth showing. Maya looked up from her math worksheet. Are we the something worth showing? You're the everything worth showing, Graham said. The girls exchanged delighted glances. We get to wear fancy dresses. Ava asked hopefully. The fanciest. And Zoe can play the piano during cocktail hour, if she wants. There's a Steinway at the venue. Zoe's eyes went wide. A real Steinway? A real Steinway. The planning consumed the next 2 weeks. Simone insisted on helping with logistics, her event coordination skills proving invaluable. Graham found himself deferring to her judgment on everything from flower arrangements to seating charts. She understood how to create atmosphere, how to make wealthy people feel both comfortable and generous. The girls helped too, in their way. Maya researched the charity recipients and prepared a presentation she wanted to share with potential donors. Ava designed the program covers, her artwork printed and distributed professionally. Zoe practiced her performance piece until she could play it in her sleep. It felt like a family project. Graham hadn't had one of those in 4 years. 3 days before the gala, his phone rang at 7 in the morning. Mr. Foster. His lawyer's voice was clipped professional. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "Derek Simmons filed for emergency modification of custody last night. He's claiming that you represent an unstable influence on his children. He's asking for immediate review of the existing arrangement, with the possibility of full custody transfer." Graham sat up in bed, fully awake. "On what grounds?" "Exposure to unfamiliar adult presence, potential manipulation through material gifts, parental alienation. He's claiming that Simone is using your wealth to turn the children against him." "That's absurd." "Of course it is. But absurdity doesn't prevent legal action. He's retained a very aggressive firm. They're pushing for an expedited hearing." "When?" 2 weeks. Possibly sooner, given that he's framed it as urgent. Graham stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city that suddenly seemed hostile. "What do we need to do?" "I'm assembling a team. The best family law attorneys in the state. We'll need documentation of Mr. Simmons' actual involvement with the children, his canceled visits, his minimal participation in their lives. Character witnesses who can speak to his parenting or lack thereof. And we'll need to prepare you for testimony." "Me?" "He's making you central to his argument. You'll need to explain your involvement with the family, your intentions, your character. The judge will want to understand why a billionaire is spending time with someone else's children." Graham thought of Maya, Ava, and Zoe, of their faces when he showed up, when he remembered their interests, when he kept his promises, of the trust they'd placed in him, fragile and hard-won. He thought of his own testimony on the stand, the questions he'd have to answer, the wounds he'd have to expose. "Whatever it takes," he said. "Those girls are not going to suffer because their father suddenly decided to care about appearances. I'll have the team at your office by noon." Graham hung up and called Simone. She answered on the first ring. She already knew. "He called me at 6, she said. Her voice was steady, but Graham could hear the tension beneath it. "Told me I'd regret involving a stranger in his family. Told me the girls belonged with their father." Then he hung up before I could respond. "Have you told them?" "No, they're still asleep. I don't know how to tell them that their father is fighting for custody when he can barely remember to show up for visits. We'll figure out together. I'm coming over." "Graham, this is my fight. You don't have to. We've had this conversation before. I'm coming over." Silence on the line. Then quietly, "Thank you." He was at her house within the hour. The girls were awake by then, eating breakfast, unaware that their worlds were about to get complicated. Graham sat with Simone in the kitchen, while the triplets watched cartoons in the living room. "My lawyers are already working," he said. "Best family law team in the state. Private investigators to document Derek's actual involvement. Character witnesses from the school, the pediatrician, anyone who can speak to his absence. I can't afford lawyers like that, Graham." "You don't have to. I'm hiring them." Simone shook her head. "This is exactly what he's going to use against us. Wealthy outsider throwing money at the problem, buying influence. He can argue whatever he wants. The truth is on our side. Those girls are thriving with you. Every teacher, every doctor, every person who actually knows them will confirm that. Derek's case is about optics, not reality. Optics matter in family court. So does evidence. And we have plenty. The investigation took 3 days. What they found confirmed Graham's suspicions and added layers he hadn't anticipated. Derek Simmons was in financial trouble. His talent agency had lost 3 major clients in the past year. He'd taken out substantial loans to maintain his lifestyle, leveraging future earnings that might never materialize. His girlfriend, Yvette, came from old money. Her family valued traditional appearances. Family men were looked upon favorably. The custody filing wasn't about the girls at all. It was about Derek's image. His access to Yvette's family wealth depended on looking like a devoted father, whether he actually was one or not. "He's using them as props," Graham said, reviewing the investigator's report in his home office. Simone sat across from him, her face pale but determined. "He doesn't want custody. He wants the appearance of fighting for custody. He wants to prove to Yvette's family that he's the kind of man who would fight for his children. Then why not just ask for more visitation? Why full custody modification?" because asking for more visitation would require actually visiting. Full custody is a dramatic gesture that looks good without demanding follow-through. He can lose the case and still tell Yvette he tried. Simone's hands clenched in her lap. Those are our daughters, our actual children, and he's treating them like a marketing strategy. I know. I want to destroy him. Graham had never heard that tone in Simone's voice before, cold and precise, the sound of a mother whose children have been threatened. We can't destroy him, Graham said carefully, but we can defeat him, and we can make sure the record reflects exactly what kind of father he's been. Every canceled visit, every missed event, every promise broken. If you want to play games with custody courts, we'll show the court who's actually playing games. What about the girls? They'll have to know eventually. They might have to testify. Children that young rarely testify directly, but the guardian ad litem will interview them. They'll ask questions about their lives, their relationships, their preferences. The girls will tell the truth because they always tell the truth, and the truth is that their father has been absent for years while you've been everything. Simone looked out the window at the backyard where her daughters had played countless hours. I never wanted them to be caught in the middle of adult battles. Neither did I. But sometimes battles come to you whether you want them or not. All we can do is fight smart and protect what matters. 2 nights before the gala, Simone broke. Graham found her in her kitchen after the girls were asleep, sitting on the floor with her back against a refrigerator, crying silently. Her shoulders shook, but no sound escaped. He didn't ask questions, just sat down beside her on the cold tile floor and pulled her into his arms. She cried for 20 minutes. Years of accumulated strain, single parenthood, the divorce, building a career while raising 3 children, watching her daughters wait for a father who never came. The custody thread had broken something open, and now all was pouring out. I can't lose them, she whispered finally, her voice raw. I can't. They're everything. They're the only reason I kept going after the divorce. The only reason I built a business and bought this house and got up every morning when all I wanted to do was disappear. I can't lose them, Graham. You won't. You can't promise that. I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to make sure you don't. Every resource I have, every connection, every lawyer and investigator and expert witness money can buy. And if that's not enough, I'll find more. Because I'm not losing you either. Any of you. Simone pulled back and looked at him. Her face was tear-streaked, vulnerable in a way she never allowed herself to be. Why? She asked. Why are you doing all this? You barely know us. 3 months ago, we were strangers. You could walk away from this mess and no one would blame you. Graham cupped her face in his hands. Because I spent 4 years walking away from everything. From joy, from connection, from the risk of loving anyone again. I told myself I was being smart, protecting myself from more loss. But all I was doing was dying slowly in a house full of empty rooms. His voice cracked slightly. Then 3 girls walked up to my table and asked me to pretend to be their father. And I realized I wasn't pretending. I was doing what I should have been doing all along. Living, participating, taking risks that might hurt because the alternative is a life that's safe but dead. He kissed her forehead. I love you, Simone. I love your daughters. I love the chaos and the noise and the way Maya argues about everything, and Ava sees beauty in everything, and Zoe feels everything so deeply. I love being needed. I love showing up. I love the person I'm becoming when I'm with your family. Simone was crying again, but differently now. I love you too, she said. God help me, I love you too. I didn't want to. It's too fast and too complicated, and everything about this is wrong timing. But I love you. Then we fight together. Whatever comes, whatever Derek throws at us, we face it as a team. Okay, Simone whispered. Okay, together. The kiss that followed was different from the one on the porch. More desperate, more certain. 2 people who had decided that fear was no longer acceptable, that love was worth the risk of loss. When they finally separated, Simone laughed weakly. The gala is in 2 days. I probably look terrible. You look beautiful. You're a liar. I'm an honest man who has learned the difference between tears of despair and tears of relief. These are the second kind. Simone leaned her head against his shoulder. The girls are going to be unbearable when they find out we're officially together. They already know. Maya told me last week that you smile differently when you talk about me. Apparently it's obvious. Traitors. All three of them. Graham smiled against her hair. For a moment, sitting on a kitchen floor at midnight, the custody battle and the gala, and all the complications waiting for them seemed manageable, because they weren't facing them alone. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. Alone, everything was overwhelming. Together, everything was possible. The gala transformed the Museum of Contemporary Art into something ethereal, blue and silver draped from the ceilings. Candlelight reflected off polished floors. The Steinway grand piano sat on a raised platform, waiting for Zoe's performance. 500 guests arrived in evening wear, ready to write checks for children's health research. But Graham barely noticed them. He was watching Simone descend the main staircase. She wore a midnight blue gown that moved like water around her legs. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Diamond earrings caught the light. She looked like a woman who belonged in magazine photographs. But what Graham saw was a person who had cried on her kitchen floor 2 nights ago and then gotten up and kept fighting. Behind her, 3 girls in matching silver dresses with different colored sashes descended together. Maya wore blue, Ava wore green, Zoe wore purple. They held hands, presenting a united front. His family. The word resonated in Graham's chest with a weight that was both terrifying and wonderful. Guests noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Graham Foster, who had attended these events alone for 4 years, suddenly surrounded by children and a stunning woman who looked at him like he mattered. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. The truth was better than any rumor they could invent. If you've ever watched someone rebuild their life from the wreckage of loss, you know how fragile that reconstruction can be. One wrong word, one broken promise, one unexpected storm can bring everything crashing down again. But you also know that the act of building, of trying despite the risk, is what makes us human. Graham Foster thought his story ended in a car accident 4 years ago. He was wrong. And what happens next will prove that sometimes the most important chapters start when we think the book is already closed. Keep watching, because the story isn't over yet. Todd Richardson, Graham's business partner, approached with his wife, a silver-haired woman named Margaret who chaired 3 nonprofit boards. "You've been holding out on us, Foster." Todd's eyes moved from Simone to the triplets. "When you said you had personal matters to tend to, I thought you meant golf. I don't play golf." "Exactly my point. You don't do anything personal. And yet here you are with a beautiful woman and 3 children who clearly adore you." Todd extended his hand to Simone. "Todd Richardson. I've worked with Graham for 15 years and never seen him smile this much. You're clearly a miracle worker." Simone shook his hand. "Simone Carter. And the smiling is really the girl's doing. I just supervise." "We're not that hard to supervise," Maya interjected. "We're very well behaved. Usually." Margaret Richardson laughed. "I like this one. Direct. Reminds me of myself at that age." The evening unfolded better than Graham had hoped. The girls charmed everyone they met. Maya engaged a tech investor in conversation about renewable energy, explaining her science fair project, with the confidence of someone 3 times her age. Ava circulated through the gallery, offering surprisingly sophisticated commentary on the artwork. And Zoe, when her moment came, sat at the Steinway and played Chopin so beautifully that the entire room fell silent. Graham watched from the edge of the crowd. Simone beside him. "She's remarkable," Simone murmured. "All 3 of them are. You've raised extraordinary children, with a lot of help from their grandmother. And now, apparently, from you." Graham took her hand. They'd agreed to be public tonight. No more pretending they were just friends or casual acquaintances. Whatever came from the custody hearing, they would face it together. And that meant being honest about what they were to each other. "Mr. Foster." Graham turned. Derek Simmons stood behind them, Yvette on his arm, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't supposed to be here. "Derek," Simone said, her voice carefully neutral. This is a private event. I called in a favor. One of my clients donated significantly to this charity last year. They were kind enough to include me on the guest list. Graham felt Simone tense beside him. He squeezed her hand gently. What do you want? Graham asked. To see my daughters. They're performing at a gala hosted by my ex-wife's new boyfriend. Surely I have a right to witness that. Your daughters are performing because they've practiced and prepared, because they wanted to contribute to something meaningful, not because of who's hosting or who's watching. Derek's smile flickered. You've gotten very comfortable speaking about my children, Mr. Foster. I've gotten comfortable being present in their lives. Perhaps you should try it sometime. The confrontation was drawing attention. Other guests had noticed the tension, the two bright smiles that didn't match the aggressive body language. Daddy? Maya appeared at Graham's elbow, her sisters behind her. They'd seen Derek approach, had come to investigate, or to defend, girls. Derek's voice shifted, becoming warmer, more performative. You look beautiful. I'm so proud of you. Why? Zoe asked quietly. What do you mean, why? You're my daughters. I'm always proud of you. But you don't come to things. Maya's voice was matter-of-fact. You said you'd come to Zoe's recital, and you didn't. You said you'd take us for the summer, and you canceled. Why are you here now? The question cut through Derek's performance like a blade. Nearby guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Yvette looked uncomfortable, her carefully cultivated poise slipping. I'm here because I love you, Derek said, but his voice had lost its warmth. Because you're my daughters, and that matters to me. Does it? Ava asked. Because your girlfriend calls us the baggage when she thinks we can't hear, and you never correct her. Yvette's face went pale. That's not, Derek started. We heard her, Maya said, at Christmas, on the phone with her friend. She said, I didn't sign up for 3 kids. And then she called us baggage. And you were right there. You heard her too, but you didn't say anything. The silence that followed was devastating. Derek looked at his daughters, at the 3 faces that held no anger, only clear-eyed assessment of who he was. Not who he pretended to be, who he actually was. This is not the place for this conversation, he said finally, his voice strained. No, Maya agreed. The place was at our house, at our school, at our recitals and fairs, and ordinary days. But you weren't at any of those places, so we're having it here. Graham felt his chest swell with pride and heartbreak simultaneously. These children, defending themselves with quiet devastation. These children, who should never have needed to develop such skills. I think you should leave, Graham said to Derek. His voice was low, but carried clearly, before this becomes more of a scene than it already is. Derek's face twisted. You don't get to tell me what to do. Those are my children. Then act like their father, instead of a man using them as props for his own image. Something dangerous flickered in Derek's eyes. We'll finish this in court, he said. And when we do, you'll regret ever inserting yourself into my family. Your family chose me, Graham said simply. I didn't insert myself anywhere. They asked for help because you weren't helping them. They approached a stranger because their father had become one. Derek turned and walked away, Yvette hurrying after him on unsteady heels. The confrontation had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had shifted something fundamental. The girls watched him go. I'm sorry, Graham said to them. That wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Maya shook her head. It's okay. We wanted to say those things for a long time. We just never had someone standing beside us when we said them. You'll always have someone standing beside you, Graham promised. Always. Zoe slipped her hand into his. Ava took the other. Maya wrapped her arms around Simone's waist. The 4 of them stood together in the middle of the gala, surrounded by hundreds of people, and somehow it felt like they were alone in the best possible way. A family, forged from loss and longing and the courage to try again. The custody hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Graham had testified early, explaining his involvement with the family, his history of loss, his intentions for the future. He'd been honest, sometimes painfully so, about Oliver, about Katherine, about the 4 years of emptiness that had preceded 3 little girls in lavender dresses asking him to pretend. Now he sat in the gallery, watching Simone prepare to take the stand. Derek's lawyer had been aggressive. He'd questioned Graham's motives, his stability, his reasons for attaching himself to someone else's children. Graham had answered everything directly, refusing to be provoked, letting the truth speak for itself. The guardian ad litem had submitted her report that morning. She'd interviewed the girls separately, asked about their daily lives, their relationships, their preferences. Her conclusion was clear. The children were thriving in their mother's care and had developed a healthy, positive relationship with Graham Foster. Their father's involvement was minimal and inconsistent. Derek sat at the defense table looking smaller than Graham had ever seen him. Yvette was notably absent. According to Graham's investigators, she'd ended the relationship 2 days after the gala. Her family valued appearances, but not the kind that came with public confrontations about neglected children. Ms. Carter, Simone's lawyer, said, "Can you describe the typical visitation pattern with Mr. Simmons over the past year?" Simone's voice was steady. He was scheduled to take the girls every other weekend and 2 weeks during summer break. In the past 12 months, he's completed maybe 30% of those visits. The others were canceled, usually with less than 24 hours' notice. And his involvement in their education and medical care? Minimal. He's attended 1 parent-teacher conference in 3 years. He's never taken them to a doctor's appointment. He couldn't name their teachers or their pediatrician if you asked him. What about their relationship with Mr. Foster? Simone paused, glancing at Graham in the gallery. Graham shows up. That's the simplest way to put it. He comes to their school events. He knows their interests and their fears and the things that make them laugh. He's earned their trust not through gifts or grand gestures, but through consistent presence, through keeping his promises. And your relationship with Mr. Foster? We're partners. We love each other. And we're building a life together that includes my daughters, not as accessories or obligations, but as the center of everything. The hearing continued. Teacher testimonies, medical records, character witnesses. A portrait emerged of 2 very different kinds of involvement. One father who had rights on paper, but absence in practice. Another man who had no biological connection, but had chosen to be present every single day. When the judge called for a brief recess before a decision, Graham stepped outside to the hallway. Derek followed him. "You've won," Derek said. His voice was flat, defeated. "I can see in the judge's face. She's going to rule against me." Graham said nothing. "I just wanted Yvette to see me as a family man. Her parents were pressuring her about my priorities. I thought if I fought for custody, even if I lost, it would prove something." "It did prove something," Graham said. "It proved that your daughters were right about you." Derek flinched. "I'm not a bad person." "No, you're just not a father. Not in the ways that matter. You could have been. You had 8 years to be present in their lives. You chose not to. That's not villainy. It's just absence. And absence is its own kind of cruelty." Derek looked at the floor. "They're better off without me. That's what you're saying. They're better off with people who choose them. That's what I'm saying. You could still be one of those people. You could start showing up, start remembering birthdays and recitals and ordinary Tuesdays. But you have to want it enough to actually do it. And I don't think you do." The silence stretched between them. "I hope you're wrong about me," Derek said finally. "So do I," Graham said. "For their sake. But hope is an action. And action is what children remember." The judge's decision came an hour later. Custody arrangement unchanged. Derek's petition dismissed with prejudice. The court found no evidence that Graham Foster's presence was harmful to the children and considerable evidence that it was beneficial. The existing visitation schedule would remain in place. But Derek was required to complete a parenting course before exercising further visitation rights. Simone broke into tears when the verdict was announced. The girls, waiting in a supervised room down the hall, were brought in to hear the outcome. They ran to their mother, to Graham, a jumble of arms and relief and the particular joy of children who had been scared and now weren't. "Can we go home now?" Maya asked. "Yes," Simone said. "We can go home." Graham drove them back to Simone's house. The girls fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Simone sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting on Graham's knee. "It's over," she said quietly. The legal part is over. The rest is just beginning. The rest? Graham glanced at her, then back at the road. The part where we build a life together. The part where I become more than a guest in your home. The part where these three girls call me something other than Graham or Mr. Foster. Simone was silent for a moment. What would you want them to call you? Whatever feels natural to them. But I'd be honored if someday they felt comfortable calling me Dad. That's a big step. I'm ready for big steps. If you are. Simone's hand tightened on his knee. I'm ready, she said. I've been ready since you sat in Derek's empty seat at Zoe's recital. Maybe before that. Maybe since three girls in lavender dresses told me they found someone who looked sad enough to understand them. Graham pulled into Simone's driveway and turned off the engine. In the back seat, the triplets slept on, peaceful and unaware that their futures had just been secured. I love you, Graham said. I love you too. Then let's stop surviving. Let's start living. Simone smiled, and it was a kind of smile that meant yes without words. 6 months later. Summer had transformed Graham's estate. The pool was finally being used, three girls treating it like their personal aquatic kingdom. Biscuit, the three-legged dog, had joined the family and spent his days chasing the triplets across manicured lawns that were now gloriously trampled. Graham stood on the terrace, watching. Maya was practicing her diving form, determined to master the perfect entry. Ava was floating on her back, probably composing artistic narratives about clouds. Zoe sat at the edge, her feet dangling in the water, humming something that sounded like her latest piano piece. Simone was photographing them. She'd started a new project, documenting families who had been rebuilt from loss. Graham's family was the first subject. Their story would be the introduction. Mrs. Chin emerged from the house with a tray of lemonade. She'd adapted remarkably well to the chaos. Some days, Graham suspected she enjoyed it more than he did. They're getting pruny, she announced. 30 more minutes, then we're drying off and eating actual food. Yes, Mrs. Chun. 3 voices chorused obediently. Graham reached into his pocket and felt the small velvet box that had been there for 2 weeks. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for today. Simone, he called. Can you come here for a second? She lowered her camera and walked toward the terrace, her smile questioning. What's up? Graham took her hand and led her to the edge of the lawn where the gardens began. Behind them, the girls continued swimming, unaware. In front of them, roses bloomed in colors Katherine had chosen a decade ago. 6 months ago, Graham said, I was drinking tea alone at Charity Gala, wondering if I'd ever feel alive again. I remember your daughters approached me with a plan. A scheme, really. They wanted me to pretend to be their father, so that their real father might notice they existed. Simone's eyes were wet already. She knew where this was going, but I wasn't pretending. Not really. From the first moment Maya took my hand, I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. Showing up, being present, choosing a family that was brave enough to choose me. Graham released her hand and lowered himself to one knee. Behind them, Ava noticed. Then Maya, then Zoe. Splashing stopped. Mrs. Chan set down the lemonade tray. Simone Carter, Graham said, opening the velvet box. The ring inside was simple, elegant, a diamond surrounded by smaller stones the color of each girl's gala sash. Blue, green, purple. Will you let me stop pretending? Will you let me be their father for real? Will you marry me? Simone was crying now, laughing and crying. Yes, she said. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Graham slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her properly. Behind them, 3 voices erupted. He finally asked, We knew it was coming. Does this mean we can call him Dad now? Please say yes. Simone and Graham broke apart, turned to face 3 dripping children who had abandoned the pool entirely. You can call me whatever feels right, Graham said. Maya considered this for approximately 2 seconds. Dad, she said, testing the word. Dad. Yeah, that works. Dad. Ava agreed. Dad. Zoe added, and then all 3 of them were running toward him, wet and pruny and overflowing with joy. Graham caught them in his arms. He thought of Katherine, of Oliver, of the family he'd lost and the family he'd found, of the way grief had nearly consumed him, and the way 3 girls in lavender dresses had pulled him back to life. He thought of tea rooms and charity galas, and empty seats at piano recitals, of custody hearings and public confrontations, and quiet moments on porch swings. He thought of all the ways his story could have ended, and all the ways it had continued instead. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was thanking. Katherine, maybe, for teaching him how to love. Oliver, for showing him what it meant to be needed. The universe, for refusing to let him stay lost. Or maybe he was thanking 3 stubborn girls who had seen a sad man drinking tea alone and decided he needed saving. Either way, gratitude was the only word that fit. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, held in the garden of Graham's estate on a perfect September afternoon. Maya served as junior maid of honor. Ava designed invitations. Zoe played the processional on the Steinway. They'd moved outdoors for the occasion. Derek sent a card. A simple congratulations, nothing more. He'd completed his parenting course and had begun showing up for some visits. Not all, not consistently, but more than before. The girls accepted it for what it was, imperfect progress from an imperfect person. Graham's father flew in from London. They reconnected slowly over the past months, building something that would never be close, but might eventually be real. Some relationships couldn't be fixed. They could only be accepted. Simone's parents cried throughout the ceremony. Her mother kept saying she'd known, from a moment she'd seen Graham at Zoe's recital, that he was the one. Mrs. Chin organized the catering with military precision and cried during the vows, which she denied later with considerable indignation. And when the officiant pronounced him married, when Graham kissed his wife and turned to face the small gathering of people who loved him, 3 voices cut through the applause. Group hug. The Foster family, 5 strong now, collapsed into a tangle of formal wear and laughter. This is where we leave them. But before you go, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone find their way back from grief? Have you ever seen children refuse to give up on getting the family they deserved? Have you ever witnessed a moment when pretending became something real? Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this story touched you most. Subscribe to The Timeless Tale if you want more stories about second chances and the courage it takes to love again. And remember, sometimes the best decisions feel like the worst ideas until they change everything. The nursery took 2 years to dismantle. Graham waited until he was ready, until the act felt like honoring rather than erasing. Simone helped him pack the tiny clothes and in used toys. The girls made a ceremony of it, choosing items to keep, items to donate, items to save for someday children who might want to know about Oliver. The room became a music studio for Zoe, a place where Oliver's memory could coexist with new life, new sounds, new stories. Katherine's photographs stayed on the walls of the master bedroom. Graham told the girls about her sometimes, about the woman who had taught him how to love, who had given him Oliver, who would have adored these 3 fierce daughters had she lived to meet them. They asked questions. He answered them. And slowly, his first family became part of his second, not replaced but integrated, not forgotten but transformed. Grief, he learned, was not a destination. It was a companion. You didn't leave it behind. You learned to walk beside it, letting it inform but not define, letting it remind you that love was always worth the risk of loss. Because the alternative, the safe path, the empty rooms and avoided feelings and slow death disguised as living, that was no alternative at all. He'd been given a second chance. 3 little girls had offered it to him in a tea room at a charity gala, without knowing they were offering anything at all. And he'd said yes. That was the secret, Graham realized. The only secret that mattered. When life offers you a chance to love again, when children ask you to pretend until pretending becomes real, when a woman sees your grief and chooses you anyway, you say yes. You say yes. And you show up, and you keep showing up until showing up becomes the most natural thing in the world. That's what family means. That's what fathers do. That's what love looks like when it's built from the wreckage of loss and held together by the simple act of being present. 3 years after the wedding, Graham sat at table 12 of another charity gala. Different venue. Same cause. Katherine's reading corner had expanded to 30 hospitals now. her legacy growing, her name living on in the spaces where children still needed stories. Beside him, Simone reviewed photographs on her camera. Her project had been published, a book called Rebuilt, Stories of Families Found, which had become a surprise bestseller. At the next table, Maya, now 11, was explaining something about climate science to a bemused investment banker. Ava was sketching the chandeliers. Zoe was preparing for a performance later that evening, a Debussy piece she'd mastered over months of practice. Graham sipped his tea. Earl Grey, same as always. A small boy approached the table, maybe 7 years old. He was alone, his face uncertain, his eyes too old for his face. "Excuse me," the boy said. "Are you the man who does the reading program?" "I am. My sister is in the hospital. She likes books. Someone from your program reads to her every day. She wanted me to say thank you." Graham set down his teacup. "What's your sister's name?" "Emma." "Tell Emma I'm glad the program helps. And tell her to keep fighting. Stories have power. They help us survive the hard parts." The boy nodded solemnly and disappeared back into crowd. Simone looked at Graham. "You okay?" "Yeah." Graham smiled, just remembering. Remembering what? That sometimes the best love stories start with a whispered conspiracy. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones who barely know us at all. Simone took his hand. The gala continued around them. Their daughters thrived. Their family grew. Their love deepened with each ordinary day. And somewhere in the universe, Graham liked to think Katherine and Oliver were watching, not waiting for him, not pulling him toward them, just watching, pleased that he'd finally learned what they'd known all along. That showing up is everything. That presence is the only gift that matters. That life is not about the losses we survive, but about the love we're brave enough to build afterward. 3 girls had taught him that. 3 girls who had seen a sad man drinking tea alone and decided he was worth saving. They were right. He was